Miami Condo Mondays is a live podcast on the first workday of the week at 4 p.m. South Florida time. The program features former journalist and current Wall Street consultant Peter Zaleski of the Miami Condo Investing Club and former lender and veteran condo broker Jenny Huertas of CVRRealty.com. Recorded weekly in greater downtown Miami, this 1-hour discussion will provide a refreshing and sometimes controversial perspective on the state of the South Florida condo market from a pair of seasoned real estate professionals who do not always agree. The program won't tell you what to think about the South Florida condo market, but will give you something to think about before buying, selling, taking listings, or financing units. This podcast is not authorized by the Miami real estate industry and will quite possibly annoy many of its figureheads. Welcome to this week's episode of Miami Condo Mondays, broadcast live on the social media accounts of Peter Zaleski and Jenny Huertas.
Happy Monday. This is Miami Condo Mondays. I'm Peter Zaleski. I'm a condo consultant. I'm also the founder of the Miami Condo Investing Club. If you're tuning in this podcast, you're going to hear a conversation from two senior, or I don't know about senior, but veteran real estate professionals talking about a particular topic, a issue, a trend, and or a market. I'm Peter Zaleski, as mentioned. This is my partner, Jenny Huertas. She's a broker owner of a company called CVR Realty. You can find her at cvrrealty.com. Today, Jenny and I are going to spend roughly about an hour or so sharing some insight about what's going on, as well as statistics about what's going on in a market that's located southeast Broward County, just north of Aventura, just north of Hallandale Beach. Market called Hallandale. So it's two communities. They're side by side, north south. So if you're looking at a map and you start down in Miami and you go north, right when you get to that Broward County line, you're going to see Aventura on the mainland. You're going to see Hallandale Beach on the Barrier Island. Going north from there, you'll run into Hallandale Beach, town of roughly about 43,000 people or so. And then immediately north of that will be Hollywood. And then finally, just sort of give you a scope. Dania Beach will be a small little community, kind of shoehorned in between Hollywood Beach and Fort Lauderdale International Airport. Anybody wants a point of reference? 595. That is the interstate that goes from east to west. It's an interstate that'll take you all the way across the state of Florida over to the town of Naples on the Gulf Coast. If anybody's heard about this, what do they call it? Alligator Alcatraz, this brand new prison or encampment or whatever the hell you want to call it for ICE. That's going to be opening up tomorrow in the state of Florida. President Donald Trump's going to be coming down here to inaugurate the opening. That's actually going to be parallel to 595, but it'll be all the way south. It'll be on what's called Tamiami Trail. Tamiami Trail, for anybody wants to know, that's the road that connects you from Tampa to Miami. If you're in Miami, it's going to be called 8th Street or Calle Ocho, fittingly or unfittingly for the Alligator Alcatraz. So, talking Hollywood, we're talking Hallandale. Let's talk to my co-host, Jenny Huertas, CVR Realty, cvrrealty.com if you want to look her up. What's going on, Jenny?
Hey, Peter, how are you?
I'm doing well. Jenny, everybody's looking in the background. Let's see that it's a little bit dark. You're traveling, you're in the process, and you got a little bit of a different backdrop today. So how's everything going on your trip?
It's good. It's just 6 hours later than you
6
guys.
hours later. Okay, fantastic. So that means you're probably getting ready for bedtime. So we'll try to get into this podcast before we go ahead and get into your bedtime. Jenny, before we get into Hollywood Hallandale, let me sort of just give a plug. One of the things we do over at the Miami Condo Investing Club is that we do walking tours. We do tours where we spend about 3 hours. We walk about 4 miles or so. I give people a handout of all condo buildings in a particular submarket. And also, too, I help people to understand, how do you analyze a building? How do you figure out what makes sense, what doesn't make sense? Where should I spend time and where should I waste time in terms of these particular buildings? I'm a big believer that if you're going to find a condo, first you need to find a building, make sure all the fundamentals are what you agree with. And then once you find that building or buildings, now you can kind of drill down and you can focus on looking for a particular unit within a building. Jenny, are you in agreement with me on that? Or maybe you got a little bit different perspective, given the fact that, you've been in real estate north of 20 years, and prior to that, you were a financier.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You have to drill down, just look at the general market as Peter is an expert, and then a submarket and then definitely building by building, because condos work like that. It's just totally different than a single family homes. So yes, that's a really good strategy, I believe.
Okay, and to give everybody context in terms of why would I say look for a building rather than a particular unit? Well, keep in mind in the Tri-County South Florida area of Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach counties, you're going to see that we have some in the vicinity of 13,000 condo associations. Number of units is going to, or number of buildings is going to be greater because these are associations. Some associations have more than one building, and in addition to that, we got somewhere in the ballpark of 610,000 units just in the Tri-County South Florida area. So going unit by unit by unit, you're simply, it's like herding cats. Good luck with that.
Absolutely.
Jenny, quick question. When you're working with customers, how do they sort of approach it? What's their response if you say, listen, look, find a building and then we'll find a unit, or would they rather just go on whatever website they use, including your website, cvrrealty.com, and then search for something? Do they simply want to find a unit and go and chase it? Or do they actually take that bigger picture approach, more strategic in terms of how they do their search?
Yeah, I wish they were more strategic because there will be less waste of time. Because if you look at the general inventory, you will be going crazy. I believe the first thing to do is always the financials before anything. Get your budget, get your total payment a month, so you just have a clear picture of what you're getting to, and also the expenses. Based on that, then you're gonna go to see what areas fit that budget. Because doesn't matter if you like the super millionaires area where you cannot afford it. So yes, first budget, second area, and third a submarket, and fourth and last the buildings that they might consider based on what they want to live or to invest. Because it's not always somebody wants to live there, but it can be also investors or even renters.
That's a really good point. And, talking about renters, that's something we'll get into later on because that's where the 1% rule comes in. The infamous 1% rule that you and a lot of other people in the real estate industry absolutely, I say love, but I say that in a sarcastic way. So, but we will get into the renter aspect of it very quick. Now, Jenny, the way I want to approach Hollywood Hallandale, let's sort of give people kind of an overview, kind of a vibe, a feel for it. So we'll talk a little bit about, kind of some of the things you find in and around Hallandale. Hollywood Hallandale. Then we'll kind of break it down into, we'll take a look at the numbers, and then finally we'll wrap it up with maybe like some outlooks as to kind of what we see going on, in the foreseeable future. So here we are, we're on the brink of the third quarter, believe it or not. Tomorrow will be July the 1st. When July the 1st comes, we enter the second half of the year. Be very interesting to see kind of what happens with the GDP of the United States. Because remember, in the first quarter, we contracted. And if you also remember, in the second quarter, the beginning of it, we opened up with Liberation Day. That was on April the 2nd. There were tariffs announced across the board in every country in the world, including the island with penguins. And, fast forward to where we are today, we got one trade deal set up. There's supposed to be a 90-day pause. That pause comes due roughly the 8th or 9th of July. So we're going to be hearing a lot about tariffs, I would imagine, probably in the next week or so. And then to also remind you, in August, that's when the pause on tariffs to China. Remember, the Chinese tariffs were imposed by President Trump. They got as high as 145%. So, but we've had a pause across the board on all these tariffs, but they're still going to be popping up again. So this has been a factor from what I'm seeing statistically and just the overall general vibe of the market. The stock market has come roaring back. It surpassed kind of where we were right before Liberation Day. However, Jenny, we do a Condo Cliff Index. We update it every Tuesday. What I can tell you is for the last month or two, that's all you're seeing is you're seeing it stagger, slide down. There are slight blips going up. For the most part, it's momentum and a trend going downward. What have your clients been saying macro-wise in terms of is Liberation Day, is it even an issue? Do they care? Or what's kind of your take on it?
Well, I think what happened is like everything is happening at the same time. So we have the summer, we still have high interest rates on the mortgages, And we have a situation in the country where everybody's kind of standing by to see what happens for the economical progress of any person. At this time, they are like probably holding off and say, is it a good idea to buy a place now or should I wait? So everybody's kind of in the same page. So only people that are seasoned investors and they can come with terms that a seller can say, okay, I give up. Yes, I sell it to you and close in 15 days, for example. I see things like that happening where they're going to get a discount and things are going to be moving again. But we are, at the moment, we are just, it's definitely an interesting summer, this one.
Jenny, you mentioned interest rates just to sort of share with the audience. If you want to figure out what mortgage rates are, what a lot of people say is a rule of thumb, you just go and you take a look at the 10-year Treasury. So the 10-year Treasury, whatever it is, that's kind of the market rate. And lo and behold, if you're going to actually take out a mortgage, a bank's probably going to add 3 points to that. Depending on your credit score, it could be less, could be more. But basically, whatever 10-year Treasury is, add 3 points. That gives you your mortgage rate. So where are we today on the 10-year Treasury here on the last day of the second quarter? We're coming in at 4.23. And if you add 3 points to that, that means mortgages, Jenny, are north of 7.2%, generally speaking. And then the next question becomes, well, okay, where were we prior to Liberation Day? So where were we April the 1st? Remember, Liberation Day was April the 2nd. On April the 1st, we were coming in at 1 point, Yeah, I wish it was 1. If it was 1, this real estate market would be on fire. We were on April the 1st, we came in at 4.16. So we've only had a slight increase in overall in the 10-year Treasury, although there was a lot of volatility in and across the board. The highest rate that the 10-year Treasury got to was 4.6. So 4.6 plus 3%. Now you're talking close to 8% of the mortgage rate. So fortunately, they pulled back, but they haven't pulled back enough for what some people say is necessary in order to jumpstart the sales process. And what should interest rates begin with, according to some people? Should begin with a 5 handle. Now we are effectively at a 7 handle. And if you go off the point, you add 3 points to whatever the 10-year Treasury is. In order to get a 5 handle, Jenny, the 10-year Treasury has got to be in the 2 range. Yeah. I don't see that happening anytime soon, especially with the debt, especially with the big, beautiful bill that's working its way through Congress right now that some say will increase the deficit. And as deficit goes up, United States becomes much more of a risk in terms of from an investor perspective. So therefore, there's a higher interest rate that has to be paid in order to bring in money to buy this debt. So Jenny, 7% mortgage rate. What are buyers saying? They like it, they dislike it, or they expecting it to fall back, and therefore they're sitting on the sidelines waiting?
No, I start seeing a lot of creative lending by private money. So where they secure the loan for less, like let's say 6%, which is below what any regular bank will give you. Yes. So I believe that we're gonna see more of that creative because otherwise nobody's gonna pay 8% just because for every $100,000 that they loan is $800 a month. So it's just the numbers won't work because they need to make a lot of money in order to qualify, have a great credit, and paying double what the neighbor is paying for their mortgage. So I think a lot of people is going to keep renting until the market don't get probably where the market price for interest rate go on the 6%, which is actually normal. We have a super low interest rate in 2021, like 3%, 4%. And those times, I don't know if they're going to come back. It depends on what happened with our economy. So since we depend on all these economical factors, people need to be comfortable and say, okay, now I'm going to do it because I think 6% worked for me. But 8%, I have a hard time thinking that somebody's going to take debt. However, there is some people that have money in the stock market, and they may pull the money if they see the opportunity to pay cash, and then cash is going to be key.
Cash is going to be king. And if you remember going into the summer, we said that this would be, or we named this summer, the summer buying season, which goes from May through October. We named it the summer of paralysis by analysis, or wait and see. And effectively, Jenny, that's pretty much what we're seeing thus far, 2 months into a 6-month summer buying season. So, all that being said, Jen, let's go ahead and get into the Hollywood Hallandale Beach marketplace. So to give kind of people context, down in the south of the Tri-County area of Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach County, down in the south, you got Miami-Dade County. You're going to be coming in at about 2.7 million people or so. If you go to the north, you'll have Broward County. Broward's going to come in at about 2 million people. And then when we get into Palm Beach County, we're looking somewhere in the ballpark, 1.5 million or so, 1.4, somewhere just kind of, rough general estimates. So we're over 6 million people. Some will say close to 6.5 million people, at least prior to all of the immigration issues that have begun. Who's to say how that's going to play out, because there's temporary protective status that's been canceled. And I was listening to an interview by a former Florida congressman down here. He's saying there's 1 million people who have temporary protective status from a whole variety of groups, everything from Cuba to Haiti to Nicaragua, that effectively could have deportation orders. So, think about that, and think also too, what is that going to do to the population? What's going to do to the economy? What's going to do to that construction jobs, all kinds, service industry, all that type of stuff. So we got a lot of unknowns. But that being said, Jenny, I would say Miami-Dade County to the south, that's going to be your more multinational type of place. That's a place where 54% of the people are foreign born. That's where you're going to have a lot of jet set money. And then to the north in Palm Beach County, you're going to have a lot of the old, let's call it older Florida. It's going to be more of a, it's not going to be as diverse as maybe what you will find in Dade and Broward County. And then Broward County is kind of right in the middle. It's kind of that melting pot. It's that blend, that transition. Think about it almost like an hourglass. So on one side, you got Palm Beach County, and then on the other side, you got Miami-Dade County, and Broward County is kind of in the middle, where stuff sort of meshes. It's a crossroads. It kind of mixes up. Would you agree with that perspective? Or
Yes, yes, absolutely. It is true. Historically, Hallandale Hollywood was a playground for Canadians. So that's another interesting issue to these times. So what's going to happen? Because it was really affordable. I think it's still affordable. Like Hallandale is one of those areas where is, you're close to the beach, you're close to the intercoastal, you're between counties, so distance is in the middle. But I almost feel like it's like a transition place that you just go through it. It's not just a huge destination. I think it's getting more popular. Why? Because prices are more affordable than the other two counties, and the lifestyle is good. I mean, it's quiet, and you it's a little bit suburban. Like, it's hard to find a place to walk around. You want to be on the beach or in the intercoastal. You want to need the car to go everywhere. So that's the catch. That's the catch.
No, and that's a good point. And Jen, that might be a good way to kind of look at Broward County. So down in the south of Broward County, remember, you got Dade to the south, you have Palm Beach County to the north, in the middle is Broward County. So Fort Lauderdale is pretty much in the center. In many people, when they look at the market, they look at Miami and they look at Fort Lauderdale. And then, there's two sides of that, in terms of the middle. There's a county line that kind of splits up. Traditionally, when there's a big college football game down here, when they hold like a championship game over at a former Orange Bowl, which they now call the Hard Rock, what they would do, the organizers, is they would put one team in Broward County in and around Fort Lauderdale, and they put another team in Miami County. Why? Because they're both they're equally separated, although the vibes and the feels are tremendously different. For instance, this week, Jenny, I'm going to cricket. I'm going to go see Major League Cricket, and the first, and which was only cricket ground that was recognized in the United States, is in one place in the country. It's in Lauderhill, which is just west of Fort Lauderdale. Why is it in Lauderhill? There's a huge West Indian community. West Indians, meaning the Caribbean, the part that used to be kind of governed by United Kingdom back in the day. And therefore, they played cricket because of the British influence. So when they're going to go ahead, they got this parkland. And Broward County is like, okay, let's build something for the residents. What do they build? They build a cricket ground. A cricket ground. Now, suddenly, cricket's starting to spread throughout the United States. There's we just had the World Cup which Broward County hosted last year. Then we got the Olympics coming up in 2028, just to kind of give you an idea. So there's a real diversity you're going to find in Broward County, as well as places to the west. And the vibe is a little bit different. You mentioned on the east side of Broward County, you had a lot of Canadians. A lot of Canadians tended to go just south of Fort Lauderdale, just north of Miami, a place that was reasonably priced, and that typically was Hollywood, Hallandale. Now, the flip side, Jenny, is if you go in the northern part of the county, you're going to run into Pompano Beach. Pompano Beach, another popular destination for Canadian investors. Right. And generally speaking, what you'll find is both of them tend to be, I think the legacy is these were retirement type of areas. You have a lot of what they call over 55 communities. These are communities you have to be 55 or over in order to buy and even live in, except with, where there's few exceptions. But this is where they're concentrated. This is where a lot of the old product is, simply because it was sold back in the 70s and the 80s and even sometimes the 60s.
Yes, absolutely. I think it changed a little bit, throughout the years, but a lot of these people kept a second places here. Not people that retire, but they will spend the summer in there and then come back because they're not even residents. They come just for the visitors visa. And, the United States has always been, or Florida at least, has been very open to sell to foreigners, which is important for the people to know. It's pretty easy. It's not difficult at all. You cannot live here, but you can buy here. You know what I mean? Like, you have the restrictions to live here, but you can always acquire real estate, which has been fueling all our market for years and years, and maybe it's gonna continue to be the trend depending on what happens. Do you think?
Oh yeah, no, 100%. And Jenny, talking about some of these Canadians. So what they would typically do is, because everybody knows about how bad the winters are in Canada. So what would happen is, as soon as winter started to come around, you knew it, even though you were down here in South Florida and the weather was pretty much always the same. It's either wet or dry. You knew when winter was turning up in Canada, because suddenly all these license plates on cars would come into town and they would all say Quebec. Sometimes they would say Ontario, but for the most part, they always said Quebec. And you always knew when the Canadian so-called snowbirds were in town, because they all drove on down. They spent 2, 3, 4, 6 months in South Florida. And then when the weather started to turn, they would head back north. Generally speaking, the winter went from about the Thanksgiving in the United States, which is November, up until, in and around Easter or Passover, which is typically sometime in late March or April. So there was this constant. And a lot of these Canadians, especially, they would go to Hollywood, Hallandale. They'd also go to Pompano Beach.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're still there, but some of them are selling. That's what I heard.
Yeah, there was an interview that WLRN, that's the NPR affiliate down in Miami, did. They did an interview with a Canadian former columnist for the newspaper out of Toronto. I think it's the Globe Mail. And the columnist was talking about the fact that, they got places down in Florida, but they don't know if they necessarily want to come, simply from the fact that they feel disrespected. Everything about, making it a 51st state and some of the other political stuff. Not that I want to make this political, but, these are factors. And in the interview on WLRN, I think it was the Florida Roundup with Tom Hudson. But, the columnist was saying, listen, a lot of Canadians feel disrespected. Why would we get on there and burn our cash in your marketplace if, you guys don't respect us? We can spend our money elsewhere. And if and when that happens, there's a lot of downward pressure on Florida, especially the local jurisdictions. Because you can remember, a lot of the big infrastructure projects we do, the money is generated with hotel overnight stays. The money is generated by rent-a-cars from the airport. The money is generated with landing fees. There's all kinds of excess taxes that they hit out-of-towners with, including when you go to and you have your property taxes. If you're a Florida resident, you get to lock in your tax exposure from a value perspective with something called a homestead declaration. It's only given to Floridians. So if you're a Canadian, you're anybody else who's coming here and you're buying, your property tax will simply fluctuate with the valuations of what's going on. And at 2%, it can be significant, especially after the pandemic, where prices have doubled and tripled and quadrupled.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's like, I can't believe why we're talking so much about what is happening, because I never thought it was going to be such a big influence, but those are facts. And we definitely, in what we do, real estate is, or what everybody does for that matter, is influenced by things that are happening, and we have to keep our ears open to see what the people think, because they definitely invest only when they feel confident. So the confidence in the market is so important, because nobody's going to make a decision if they don't feel comfortable.
The Miami Association of Realtors every January, February, so they put out a survey of the countries with the greatest influence on foreign investment in terms of residential, whether it be single family and or condo. Primarily it's condo. A lot of people are buying it as a second home from overseas. They're primarily going to get condos. And the Canadians are always top 5. They represent some in the ballpark of 8 to 10% of all foreign investment in this residential condos. I did a piece about it a couple months ago on one of our Miami Condo Minutes. Kind of broke it all down. But the Canadian influence is tremendous. So, this is something to keep in mind if you're in the service industry, or if you're a seller. If you own a condo and you need to get out for whatever reason, maybe you can't afford the special assessments, can't afford the tax, can't afford anything, or maybe you just need a lifestyle change. If you remove a group or groups of the would-be buyers, how are you going to move the product, especially when nothing is trading? The only way you're going to move the product then is the cut pricing. That's why I would argue this is significant, especially in a place like Hollywood, Hallandale, which has traditionally had a very large Canadian influence and involvement, to the point where, drive around that area, you'll see Montreal smoked meat restaurants. You'll see a place where you can get, what do they call it? The Canadian version of French fries with gravy on it. Was it poutine, I think it's called?
I don't know.
Yeah. They have these Canadian ice cream stands up in Hollywood and in Hallandale and in Dania Beach. So real big, significant impact of the Canadians in and around this market. So I want to just bring this up because we're going to get into numbers, and you should have some context as to what could in fact be influencing these numbers.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, we have to talk about Canada, and we talk about Hallandale, Hollywood, because that's the preferred area. It's where you say they have places there, and it's amazing how the people gravitate among their friends, their family members, and also the places where they actually have some sort of connection. And Hallandale and Hollywood are totally, mainly internationally known for being Canadians. There is some other groups, of course. There is some Venezuelans and Argentinians that I see more and more, and Colombians. I think Argentinians is it's good to mention, because in my opinion, they were good in the new in that market, but it's affordable. So you buy anything below the $300,000 range, then you look at the market. And the Argentinians also are taking their money away from their country. Again, it's the population in those areas may change just because the circumstances. Canadians may leave, Argentinians may come. And the important thing is that we start moving the market, and it doesn't stay in the MLS for too long, and then nothing happened. So how are the stats? Can you tell me?
So yeah, let's get into the stats. Well, let me give you one tidbit before we do. So the Florida legislature, they passed revisions, 2025 revisions of the Florida condo law. Condo law is kind of an overarching arching way to kind of talk about anything that's kind of condo related. And generally speaking, because of all of the difficulties associated with paying for living in a condo after Surfside, the legislature, because remember, a lot of associations have to do, they're getting hit with special assessments because they've been required to do studies. One study is called the Structural Integrity Reserve Study. It's done going forward every 10-year mark. And then you got something called a milestone inspection, which is done at year 30. And then as part of these studies, the experts, these are architects, licensed engineers, they come out with estimates what everything's going to cost. And lo and behold, based on these estimates, associations are now required to start collecting money from their unit owners, which has sent maintenance fees and special assessments up tremendously. So where I'm going with this is the legislature just passed. They passed back in April, and Governor DeSantis finally signed off on it on the 18th of June. And I think ultimately was, if you look in the legislation, or if you look in the final records, it's going to say the 23rd. But effectively, the 1st of July, tomorrow, all of it kicks in. One of the big takeaways of all of this is this push, this request, this demand of putting money in reserves to pay for the work that's necessary to ensure the buildings are safe. Legislature's giving associations basically an extra 2 years in order to kind of get everything all worked out, which effectively will give them some breathing room. They're also giving them the
Right.
option as part of this. They have the ability, instead of collecting money reserves from people, they can go ahead and get a bank loan. They can get some kind of letter of credit or line of credit, something like that. So, to kind of lessen somewhat the cost of living in one of these condo associations. And this is critical because Hollywood Hallandale, the product for the most part it's older. This is not new product. This is 1970s, 1980s, maybe 1990s type of product. But this is an area that really could benefit from the legislation. But at the same point, it could also be damaged because of the costs associated with getting these buildings back into shape.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that it's being extended, which is a breathing room, as you say, it also means that they don't know what's going to be. Like in 2 years, like, okay, now we had these 2 years, and now what? What is going to mean for homeowners? It's just a little bit extending the stress, I guess, but it's also difficult for them to sell because they don't know what it's going to be, or for a buyer to buy. A buyer is going to be not happy, not knowing what is going to happen on the next 4 to 5 years of that property. Therefore, perhaps the prices are going to suffer.
And therein is the challenge. So, all right, you wanted numbers? Let's talk numbers. Right now in Hollywood Hallandale, okay, what are the boundaries going to be? Well, this is going to be effectively from 95 to the Atlantic Ocean. It'll be from Dania Beach Boulevard, small little community, and it's a good way to get into the Barrier Island as well as the mainland. So it'll be Dania Beach Boulevard south to the Broward County line. What do we got for sale in Hollywood Hallandale? 1,722 condos are currently on the market. 1,722. And how many sold during the winter buying season? Winter buying season went from November through April. That's when everybody's in town with. That's when the weather is great. You got the Pegasus race going on over at Gulfstream, the big horse track down here. So 474 units traded in the winter buying season. Remember, 1,722 for sale. So if I take the units that traded during the winter buying season, November through April, I'm going to get an average of about 79 transactions a month that occurred during the prime winter time when everybody's in town. Now, if I take these 79 units that traded per month, I divide it on what's currently on the market, 1,722. I'm coming up with 22 months of supply. 6 months is equilibrium, less than 6 months. Seller has the advantage because they say you got nothing to choose from. You want it, you pay. When it's more than 6 months, buyer has the advantage. So 6 months is what you shoot for. Hollywood Hallandale's got 22 months of supply, Jenny. 22 months of supply. Now, you might say, well, yeah, but the winter's over and everybody went back north. Let's see what it's like in the winter once it gets cool again. And once everybody gets in their car and they drive on down from Quebec or wherever they're coming from. What do you sort of say to 22 months, which, by the way, is on par with what we're seeing in places like greater downtown Miami as well as Miami Beach? Slightly higher, but still somewhat on par.
Yes, I think those numbers are interesting because if we look at the overall market, those are the areas that are most affordable. So in price-wise, in general, you can still get apartments for a lower price. I mean, if they're not moving, just imagine what's going to happen with other areas. So I'm a little surprised to see that so few units traded. I know units stay longer in the market because we have an agent that lives there, a couple of them. And they were like calling me like, what's going on with my listing? Is it still there? And I said, yes, it's still there. So they were very surprised to see that nobody was calling them on such a good priced unit. They ended up moving it, but it took way longer than they used to just a year ago.
And because you say that, I'm just going to hit you real quick with the days on market. I typically get to that last one because you brought it up. Let's just stick with the vibe. Right now in Hollywood Hallandale, if you put your condo on the market, you've been sitting there on average 168 days. 168 days from the time you listed it with an agent. Now, keep in mind, if somebody goes under contract, it's probably going to take 30, but more likely 60 additional days in order to close. So we're talking somewhere in the vicinity, Jenny, of 8 months or so on a listing. Unfortunately, for many realtors, your listing agreement's for 6 months. So if you don't get under contract that 6 months, chances are the owner is going to be like, listen, you couldn't sell it. I'm getting somebody new. When that person new comes in, they're going to say, well, it was priced too high. You need to cut the price. And lo and behold, the second agent downstream, if they can convince the seller to cut the price deep enough, they're going to be the one that gets the transaction, which is why it's critical when you're going in to get a listing. You got to make sure it's priced accurately, because who wants to sit on the market 168 days and counting in Hollywood,
Yeah.
Hallandale? Now, Jenny, in the winter buying season, how long did it take to trade a unit? Again, listing, under contract, closed. How long did it take in the winter? 98 days. 98 days in the
Yes.
winter. We're at 168 and counting right now as we enter into the third quarter of 2025.
Yeah. First thing, you have to get a contract for a year.
On a
No, that
listing
is a
agreement.
good, yeah. Forget about the 6 months. I mean, you show stats. Yeah, you show stats to clients. They understand, and they need to be prepared to that. They need to be prepared to keep that tenant or to stay there longer, unless they really, really want to cut the price and get rid of it. But if they feel comfortable with the price and they don't want to move in the price, that even if they don't want to move in the price and the market start stalling to the point that it's going to start to sell out, they're going to lose money. And all that time that they have it listed or, God forbid, vacant.
Yeah.
So it's just a talk that you have to have with clients. Say, listen, things here are taking way too long to move. If you want to move it, you have to lower the price, and perhaps you can move it instead of 90 days or 3 months to 6 months rather quickly.
Now, one of the things that's weighing down the Hollywood Hallandale Beach market is the vintage units. These are the units that are at least 30 years old. Why do we call them vintage? It's kind of a nice way to say old ass product effectively. It's product that has to go through what's called a milestone inspection now because of Surfside collapse. So at year 30, buildings are required throughout the state of Florida suddenly to go in there. They got to bring an architect and engineer. They got to go in there and they got to really drill down and figure out what's going on with the building, what's the shelf life, what needs to be fixed, what's a risk, yada, yada, yada. So 30-year mark milestone inspection. Some counties, it's a 25-year mark, but I don't want to complicate it. But 30-year mark is what you need to know. So those are vintage. Jenny, what do we got going on in Hollywood Hallandale in terms of vintage? Well, I should tell you, 72% of the market is vintage. And now compare that to a place like Greater Downtown Miami, we talked about in the past. That's 10% of the market because so much stuff that got torn down and they basically went up with huge towers. So 72% of Hollywood Hallandale, vintage. 1,250 condos, vintage condos on the market. Remember, 30 years or more. In the winter buying season of November through April, 375 sold total for an average of 63 a month. So if I take the sales pace of 63 vintage units selling during the busy go-go winter, I divide that into 1,250 that's for sale, I'm going to end up with 20 months of supply. So believe it or not, there's actually less supply of vintage, 20 months, versus the overall supply, 22 months. But still, 6 months is equilibrium. So this is a severe buyer's market in the Hollywood Hallandale Beach market.
Yeah. And most of those condos are way north of 30 years old. Like there are some, there are like more like 50 or 60 years old condos. And I guess the advantages are some of them are low rise. So the cost of fixing them should be less. It's very subjective for the type of product, but they did build some new condos here and in the area where Hallandale Beach Boulevard reached the ocean. I mean, like 20 years ago.
Yep.
And then they have a couple of condos that are there. Some new construction that is happening there. I just can't get over, but there are some new construction there. Some of them were finished just a couple years ago, and they cannot really finish to sell. A brand new luxury condo that is it's like the beautiful building in the wrong neighborhood. So it's hard to sell.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you take it and you put it somewhere else, it's perfect. But if you leave it there, it's just like, it's just difficult. It's a difficult product to sell. And then there are other condos that are new condos. And I think the argument for this new construction is, all these condos are older and really old. So perhaps you have a new product that you have to worry for the next 10 years. But they're also, expensive for that matter, expensive. It's not. It's not $300 or $500 per square foot.
Great
Let's
point.
say.
So that's a perfect segue, Jen, to get into what's going on the pricing wise. So in Hollywood, Hallandale Beach, the average asking price about $592,000 per unit, 592,000, rounded or so, just to give you a context. And then in the winter buying season of November through April of 2024 and 2025, average sales price is about 467,300, 467,300. So today's asking price is about 27% higher than what the transaction price is. We like to say normally it should be about 20% or so, which suggests that the deal's probably going to trade. Why? Because you're going to split the difference, and the next buyer is going to be a little bit of a premium off the last one. So 27%, John, on the asking price, that suggests that maybe sellers in Hollywood, Hallandale, they maybe, they still have a little bit of optimism, even though the number of days on market is going up and the amount of supply is going up. So it doesn't look like, they've lost that confidence in the market in Hollywood, Hallandale. But what do you make of $592,000 per unit, Jen? That seems like a pretty attractive price, and closed at $467,000 per unit.
Yeah, I guess, yes, you compare with any other market like Miami Beach, Sunny Isles on the ocean, obviously, and downtown Miami is very attractive. People will say, okay, I actually can afford a place there. Therefore, they are still confident, as you say, that people like that is going to compromise and drive every time they need to go to the grocery store. So it's just like we're going to see a lot of compromising either from buyers because of the budget or with sellers because they're going to be forced to lower the price. But I think there are some good deals, or I'm not sure if there are really good deals, but at least they're in the affordable price tag. You don't look inside or just at the number. So there are places that you can afford actually. So yeah, I think a lot of people is going out for discounts, if you ask me, more than 27%.
Okay. And for what it's worth, before we go into the vintage pricing, let me just tell everybody the average asking price today per square foot in Hollywood, Hallandale, $463 a foot, $463. And what did they trade for during the winter? $379 a foot. $379 per square foot. Jenny, let's talk vintage pricing. Vintage condos, man, 30 years or more. What's the average asking price today? Are you sitting down? $393,160. $393,160. What did units trade for during the winter buying season of vintage? $347,300. $347,300. That seems pretty reasonable price. And what's interesting is today's asking price on a vintage condo versus the price where they traded during the winter, 13% difference. Remember, you split the difference.
Yes.
That says these sellers of vintage, they want to do a deal. They're not looking for a premium. They're basically saying, come on in and make me an offer.
Absolutely. Yeah, because the price is good. It's attractive, and it's actually somebody can afford it. So yeah, I can see that. I can see why the difference in the asking price and the sold price is really close. It's not even like if you talk about the average, when you talk about the general market, you take into account newer condos, but in the vintage, they are pricing it right. Then they must be the only things that are moving at this time.
But wait, there's more. On a price per square foot basis, Jenny, vintage condos in Hollywood, Hallandale, $357 a foot. How much did they trade for in the winter? $314 a foot. Whoa. Am I in a way back machine? Are we going back to prior to the pandemic? These prices are actually somewhere where they seem to make sense, unlike other markets like Sunny Isles Beach, like Miami Beach, and especially like downtown Miami.
Yes, absolutely. That you cannot get that price for a garage space somewhere else.
Jenny, what was the highest price you saw pre-construction? Give people context. Was it somewhere in the ballpark of $5,000 a foot, $4,000 a square foot? It's definitely north of $3,000. Yeah,
it's about $3,500, $4,000, the most expensive. Yeah.
So you're going to say pre-construction is $3,500 a foot, and you can buy, or people bought vintage condos in Hollywood, Hallandale, $314 a foot. Think about that context.
Yeah, it is crazy, but you have also to look at the product.
Well, you're pissing on my parade here. But what I sell, will say for people overall, if you look at condos in Hollywood, Hallandale, and you compare to the vintage to them, if you were interested in chasing a vintage unit, 34% cheaper on the asking price percent wise, and then in the actual transaction price, about 26% cheaper in terms of what they trade for. So Jenny, that raises the question, well, yeah, but the prices sound good, but how do I know it's safe? This is where, if you are buying a condo, you need to ensure that the building has got its appropriate study. Remember, it could be a structural integrity reserve study, which comes every 10 years, or it could be a milestone inspection, which happens at year 30. And then every 10 years, you do another structural integrity reserve study. So Jenny, if you go into one of these buildings and the study's been conducted and completed, and there's a roadmap identifying and work will be done, does that give you peace of mind that you got a report that where somebody licensed architect and engineer, then not only they have liability from a civil side, but also potentially criminal side? Would that give you confidence to go ahead and buy one of these buildings if it's got the seal of approval in the form of a report?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I think so. Not only me, but buyers it would be something that the people actually, very few people will compromise on that. They want to know what's happening more than ever. So yes, that's definitely one of the must-have in any transaction. So that's my worry, because if they are delaying some buildings, all this process, those buildings, the people won't know anything in 2 years. So it would be good for the actual owner, but it's not going to be really good for a potential buyer.
So this brings us to our next point. This is the part that Jenny absolutely loves. So we agreed on all this. Let's see if we still agree. Now we're going to get to the 1% rule. What is the 1% rule? It says whatever your rent is per month represents 1% of your value. For instance, $1,000 a month rent means your place is worth $100,000. $10,000 a month rent means your place is worth $1 million. Your buddy who tells you they bought a place for $300,000, now it's worth $1 million, but they're getting $2,000 in rent. That's not $1 million condo. This is the way you kind of look at it. So the industry doesn't necessarily like it, but it's a fundamental sort of a way to do it, to approach it. Yeah. Everybody can look it up, go to Investopedia, go anywhere. 1% rule. So Jenny, let's take these numbers for, in Hollywood Hallandale. Let's apply it to the 1% rule. So today, the asking price in Hollywood Hallandale, $592,000 a door. What did they trade for in the winter? $467,300 a door. So we're saying today in Hallandale, if you buy a condo, you need $5,900 a month rent. If you bought a condo during the winter, you need $4,700 a month rent. What are we getting in terms of rent? And this is the part you always love. So what are we getting? Remember, you need $5,900 today if you're buying at the asking price, and if you bought in the winter, $4,700 a month rent is what you need on the 1% rule. So where are we today? In Hollywood Hallandale, the median asking price, remember, rental data is bad. I say this every single week. Bad. Why? Because there's no public document. There's no government record that has to be filed where you can actually record this stuff. A lot of it is just hearsay, is what I would tell you. And you got the groups that own large complexes. They're not going to hire a realtor. They're not going to make the information available because it's confidential. It's secretive. It also gives them an ability to sort of control pricing. So basically, rental data is bad. But that being said, we're going to use the MLS data. $2,990 a month is the median. Let's call it $3,000. So $3,000 a month is what they're asking in rent. What did they get during the winter in Hollywood Hallandale? $2,350. So that means today's pricing suggests condos are worth $300,000 in Hollywood Hallandale, and in the winter they were worth $235,000 or so, compared to what we're seeing. And what we're seeing is the average asking price is $592,000, and the units traded in the winter for $467,000. So we got a little bit of a disconnect, but it's not as significant as what we've seen in other markets, Jenny.
Yeah, we don't see it because the price is not affordable. So the rents are still high for that area. And the price of the condos are also high. But the 1% rule it's closer, but it doesn't work there either. See? We're going area by area. We still cannot find the one unless
I have given you proof of buildings where it works.
Airbnb.
No, it doesn't have to be Airbnb, but it's something you can rent
rentals.
out.
Short term, though.
Yeah, well, short-term rentals. Well, Jenny, you raise a good point here. One of the issues when you get into Broward County and you leave Miami-Dade County, what I've seen is a lot of these condos in Broward County, especially the older ones, they're probably going to be the vintage type. They tend to have restrictions, including you need to own a unit 2 years before you can actually turn around and rent it. And then when you do rent it, the lease has got to be minimum of a year, maybe 2 years, whatever the case may be.
Yes.
So, Jenny, is it safe to say that pricing in Hollywood, Hallandale, besides the age of the product, also could be impacted because the condo association declarations are much more restricted than maybe what you're going to find in Miami-Dade County, where it's much more buy it to rent it and make money rather than let's have a home with a community and everybody knows each other.
Yes, it's just those rules are so obsolete, but some of these buildings still have them because they still have the people that is close to be 90, maybe. So they don't want to move because this is true, because they want to have all this, what they feel more comfortable, that there is not a lot of people coming in and
Yeah.
out of the buildings. And even though I know somebody that owns a condo that is not that old, it's probably 2008, 2007. And
Okay.
they have a lot of restrictions there for
Okay.
rentals. Like short-term rentals, they don't allow it. They just don't allow it. And it's just like, it's newer building. But I think it's a Hallandale Hollywood Beach thing, and I think that affects appreciation of a place, because if you have too many rules, people don't want to invest.
That's true. That's true.
Mhm.
Jenny, why don't you wrap it all up for us on Hollywood Hallandale
Okay.
before I get into are you a bull, are you a bear, are you sitting on the sidelines? So give people the takeaway about Hollywood Hallandale. When should they look at that as a potential market? What kind of criteria should they be searching for in order to give a serious look to Hollywood Hallandale if they're a buyer? And then what should they do if they're a seller?
Yeah, well, first of all, as always, the budget. Second, what buildings are being either fixed on the process or they have the studies. And that's the second rule that I would do. And third, very important, is the condo association rules, because you don't want to go in something that has a lot of restrictions, even if it's a good price, unless you
Yeah.
want to use it for when you come and do shopping or anything like that, for a different reason than investment. So that would be my advice.
Got it. And what about if you you're thinking about selling your condo in Hollywood Hallandale? How would you deal in a
Okay.
circumstance like this?
You want to sell the condo, that you want to make sure that your building has a study or is actually proactive about getting it, because that's going to be good for everybody. I know that implies a special assessment. That special assessment is gonna come regardless. So maybe the condo association get a loan and they start the process, but the unknown is probably a really bad thing for condo owners in those buildings.
Yeah, because it makes you got to be a little cautious going into a building where it doesn't have the report done, because a report can find anything. And contractors, by the way, are finding anything when they actually begin the work. So these are things that are really important to sort of keep in mind. Jenny, every week I end the podcast by asking you, are you a bull with the horns going up? Are you a bear with the claw coming down? Or are you simply sitting on the sideline waiting to see? What are you on Hollywood Hallandale? Are we going up with a bull? Are we going down with a bear? Or are you sitting on the sideline and giving it a pass?
Maybe we need to get into a new system. Could be like standing up, standing on or by, just because of the circumstances that we have right now or the unknown, but also taking a real look to see where you can find value and find a good price and with the good terms in Hallandale. Meaning, maybe you want to take a closer look and try to put offers that are at a price that you feel comfortable, meaning discounts.
Awesome. So that means you are a bull, a bear, or you're sitting on the sidelines on Hollywood Hallandale.
It's more like this. I'm probably trying to get in the market by offering low prices, low ball offers.
So you're saying it's time to start lowballing in Hollywood Hallandale.
Yeah, why not?
Let them rip. Start lowballing. Okay, I always love to hear that. Jenny, the 12th of July, we're going to be doing a walking tour of the downtown Miami as well as the World Center area. It's a 3-hour tour. We're going to walk about 4 miles. I'm going to give everybody a handout, everybody who attends. We're going to give them all a handout. We're going to travel basically the distance, ballpark, of the MacArthur Causeway to the north. We'll go down to the river to the south. To the west is going to be 95, and to the east is ultimately going to be Biscayne Bay. We'll take a look at that marketplace. We'll identify a lot of buildings, some of the infrastructure projects, some of the stuff that's kind of going on there. So anybody who's interested in finding out more about that area, maybe they want to buy there, maybe they're thinking about renting, whatever the case may be, I'd encourage you to go check out, get information about the tour and possibly come join us. To get more information about the tour, you can go to miamicondoclub.eventbrite.com, miamicondoclub.eventbrite.com, or simply go to our website, miamicondo.club. And by the way, we do have a club for people who are DIYers. Maybe they're in the industry. They want to find out more about what's going on in the market. We share the data that we basically publish. We collect Wall Street type of data. We share it with you. We do a monthly virtual meeting. We also do a meetup once a month where people have an opportunity to kind of get together and kind of talk shop. So all that being said, miamicondo.club if you want more information about that. That is Jenny Huerta. She's a broker owner of CVR Realty. Look her up at cvrrealty.com. It's done for more than 20 years. She was a financier before that. I'm Peter Zalewski. I'm the founder of the Miami Condo Investing Club. I'm also a condo consultant. Thank you for tuning in to Miami Condo Mondays. Every Monday at 4 p.m., we're going to spend an hour. We're going to talk about a topic. We're going to talk about an issue, or we're going to talk about a marketplace and give you something to think about for the week. So if you're stuck in traffic, you're driving home, you're on the train, you're sick of listening to your boss, tune them all out. Turn off that 1980s classic rock on the radio station or on the radio and go ahead and tune us in. 4 o'clock on Mondays, 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time or 4 o'clock South Florida time. So this is Miami Condo Mondays. That's Jenny Huertas. I'm Peter Zalewski. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao. See you next Monday. Bye.